Grace and peace to everybody out there joining us online. We're in here talking and just enjoying ourselves and feeling the presence of God as this presence that is something from within. It's not necessarily just something from without, but something that lives right here inside of us. So, Wednesday, we had quite a discussion. If you got to go back and listen to that, or if you get to go back and listen to that, where the four of us talk about, we talk about some pretty out there stuff maybe, or some wild things, which I enjoy. I think that maybe some of you do too. But if you get to listen to that, you sort of get a glimpse inside of sort of what's going on inside of our heads and our hearts, and maybe a little bit of a picture of kind of where we sort of see things right now. And it started, well, for one, you had Michael that preached a couple weeks ago, and then on Easter too, about this wisdom, this Sophia, this idea, and that would be the Greek word for it, is Sophia. It's also Hadley's middle name, is specifically for that reason, because of what it means. It means wisdom. But this idea of wisdom out of Proverbs chapter 8, and then Josh comes in and does sort of the same thing. And then what never ceases to amaze me is some of the books that I have. I have this one book that's the translated works of an old Russian Orthodox priest, I think from the 1800s. His name was Sergei Bulgakov, and the guy that translates it titled the book The Sophiology of Death. And there's a lot that I will not have time to get into all of that, but that's at least I titled today The Sophiology of Becoming Human. The Sophiology was sort of a Russian Orthodox idea of Sophia being this wisdom, being this attribute of God, or possibly even the way that Sergei Bulgakov made it sound, is that there's not just three people in the so-called Trinity, that maybe there's this fourth being called wisdom. So this is the wisdom of becoming human. And before we finished up on Wednesday, Josh had read Reverend Juice, I like to call him that. That sort of just came out in inspiration one night, and so we've kind of just been calling him that. But he read this excerpt from a book by Theodore Nottingham, and I want to make sure that we catch that because it was so good and it rang true with me. I went back and listened to it, and I caught I want to just write it down word for word, but what he had put in here: the road less traveled by is a modern parallel to the ancient mystical metaphor. The way is narrow that leads to life, and there are few who find it, Matthew 7:14. This less traveled, more difficult road is the living out of a spiritual life rather than a mere survival in our short passage through time. And catch that. Traveling this more difficult, less traveled road is the living out of a spiritual life rather than a mere survival in our short passage through time. The less traveled road, or the mystic way, as others might call it, is therefore a process of sublimation, carrying the relationship of the self with the universe to higher levels than our ordinary states of awareness. But there is no selfish journey, for the mystic grows nearer the source of true life and participates in the creative energies of the divine. He or she is capable of greater unselfish activity to the point of unconditional love. Now keep that in mind today. To the point of unconditional love. This is the journey of one who chooses the road less traveled. And there are many who have witnessed to the fact that this harder road, this narrow way, is an inner journey leading to the infinite depths of our true self, crossing the threshold into becoming a conscious child of God, a child of the universe. So, a couple things to keep in mind while I'm talking. Unconditional love and being a child of God, which, if you've been listening for the past couple years, you've heard a whole heck of a lot about childlikeness. Right? AJ got that kicked off, and we just kind of fell into the depth of love of being children of God. And now he's kind of blown our minds even more about philosophy, being this translation of the Greek word huios, which is usually translated as child or son. But when you look it up, even it talks about a foal, like this little. I don't know if if you've driven through around here, you see a lot of farms, and you see a lot of people with horses, and you see a lot of people with goats and everything. And so you see. But yesterday we were driving. I forget where we were coming through the country, but going through, and Lauren says, "Look at that! There's this horse just rolling around in the grass like a dog, and just having a good time out there, just enjoying himself." That's the philosophy. That's part of what we're getting at. That's being like the foal of God, chasing not foolishness, but foolishness. But sometimes foolishness looks like the foolishness to men. And we'll get into that too. But we read on Wednesday night it was a conversation that Juice and Alfredo, as I call him so many times, they talked about from Psalm chapter 8 and 2. And Matthew 21:16. Matthew 21:16 being this moment where Jesus is coming into this is a triumphal entry. He's riding the foal. And like I said, we've been talking about that. Riding the foal on what is called a triumphal entry, even though it looks nothing like a triumphant king entering into a city. But here's Jesus going into town, and here's a bunch of kids running around screaming, Hosanna. All these kids are getting excited. They're jumping around, and it's boisterous. It's loud. It's not something that the Pharisees want to be happening right now in the temple. For God's sake, show some respect, kids. This is a house of worship. This is a house of prayer. Meanwhile, they're making merchandise of people on the other side of the temple. Don't worry about that. But hey, all these kids are driving us crazy. And really what the problem is, when you get down to it, the kids are interfering with the business. Somebody say amen to that. The kids are interfering with the business. Because the church over there, they had a business set up. They got people coming in here and they're buying their lambs, their rams. And it's, you can buy 2 rams for the price of 1 today. It's buy 2 birds, get 1 free. And you can make sacrifices for your sins, and you can do all the stuff that you need to do. You can make sacrifices for your granny too. Come on, everybody. So everybody come on in and buy your birds, your rams, your lambs, your hog chops. It's like that. What's that one from ham, all the stuff. Thanksgiving dinner. Come on in and buy it. We got the business going on. And these kids are running around in the middle of them trying to make some money. And we just happen to figure something out here in the church. We can get these people to come into the church. We can get them to enter into what we're doing. We get them to buy these rams here instead of bringing what's best from their flock they might not have, blah, 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 blah. Right? Kids are interfering with the money. Kids are interfering with the business. And then they tell Jesus, you got to tell all these kids following you around to shut up. And in the King James, he says, don't you hear these things that they're saying? And he says that out of the mouth of babes, he's perfected praise. But what he's doing is he's quoting Psalm chapter 8, verse 2, which in the King James says that out of the mouth of babes, he's ordained strength. That sounds like out of a baby's mouth. That suddenly, somehow, this mysterious, weird way that somehow it shows God's power and his might through being this, somehow a baby crying or something like that. So I read a lot of commentary on it. I looked through the Oxford Annotated, the SBL. I love reading through the SBL, which is Society of Biblical Literature. And it's a compilation of about 10,000 scholars that get together throughout the year and people who have specialties in Hebrew scripture, have specialties in speaking Hebrew and Greek, who can talk about the little breath marks and the accent marks in Greek and all the stuff that it means and all that kind of stuff. These people get together and they study the ancient literature, the ancient text, and they sort of come out with what it could mean more clearly for us today to understand it. And one of the commentaries, it sort of says, if you begin to put the passage from Psalms together with the passage from Matthew 21, it could read something like this: that God's strength is found in the weak cry of the infant. This perfect noise of a child's cry is the place prepared by God as a perfect dwelling place to be the bulwark against the foes, the sound of which silences the enemies. Now think about what Jesus could possibly be indicating to these Pharisees to quote the Scripture and even sort of give, if we're going to say it like that, somewhat of a retranslation of Psalm 8 and 2. Where he's saying that out of the mouth of babes, that God has perfected His strength as a bulwark against His enemies and something that silences all of the adversaries. This weak cry of a child who is wholly dependent upon another, that this sound is the thing that silences adversaries. It's the thing that removes all the devices of weaponry. Anything, and now picture an army moving in with all of its weapons of warfare, with all of their armory, with everything that they have on them. And instead of bringing out the cannons and the guns and the weapons and the ships and everything like that, they bring out the babies crying. That's what I think Jesus is sort of getting at. He's taking what would be considered the conventional wisdom and flipping it up on its head and saying something that to them, that doesn't go with the conventional wisdom. If the army is entering into the town, we got to get our army. We got to build up our bulwarks. We've got to get the cannons. We got to get the guns. We got to build up all this stuff. But instead, Jesus is here talking about a bunch of kids crying. It's the perfect place prepared of praise. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to go in with those. It does to me. It does to Josh. The Cambridge Bible gives an option for this passage as well. It says that the scarcely articulate cry of an infant proves, like the heavens and the stars, the power and providence of God. On all these, God builds a stronghold against His adversaries and convinces them of His might. So also the children in the temple attest to the truth of God. I heard this quote a few weeks ago. I can't remember who said it. I put it in my notes. I can't remember even where I heard it. But it says, let the voice of the children be heard in the church so that one day the voice of the church might be heard in them. I think about the babies that are coming in now. I think about Charlie Gray that's just been born. I think about Magnolia. I think about Palmer Say. I think about these babies that are here in the church that instead of doing what we probably would have done in the past and what sometimes might even make us uncomfortable after the shrill cry of a baby that just wants milk or just wants nurturing or something in some way. You have no idea what they want, but you just know that they're totally and entirely dependent on the person that's holding them. Instead of casting that sound out, we get to understand that it's that cry that represents the true strength of God. Not how many weapons we have, not how many degrees we have, not how intelligent we are, not how great of a speaker we are, not how full or empty the church is. None of that represents the strength of God in any way. It's the sound of the cry of a child. So what we've been proposing these past few years is not necessarily new. If you've heard a lot of the stuff we've talked about from Krishna, from ancient Hinduism, from ancient Buddhism, to ancient scripture and Hebrew text, a lot of this wisdom that we've sort of flipped back to not be the now conventional wisdom seems like that's the ancient path. And it seems like that's the path that Jeremiah was talking about, where he said, seek out the ancient paths. And when you look up that word in the Hebrew, it says it gives this idea of going beyond the vanishing point. If you've ever stood out on the beach and you look out as far as the water, as far as you can possibly see, especially at sunset, and it's where the sky meets the end of the horizon, and you can't see anything past that. It's as far as your eye can possibly perceive. He says, this wisdom, seek the path that's beyond the vanishing point. Seek the path that is beyond that vanishing point, which would mean it goes beyond what our eyes can see. It goes beyond our physicality. So what Paul said is that we walk by, come on and tell me, well, we walk by faith and not by, so it's not by how far I can see. And some of us have good vision, some of us have poor vision. But it doesn't matter at that point what type of vision you have, because you're not seeing with natural eyes. You're seeing with something that is from within. So it's going beyond the vanishing point would mean to see beyond what you can see, which brings us to faith. Time out of time. So we've had you on this journey. Oh, I forgot to mention this. So for the past few years, we've talked about this on this journey, and that's mentioned at the outset that from the road less traveled that Josh had read Wednesday. And it's this journey, what the guy calls is a journey of sublimation, which in a couple different ways that you can translate that, or that people could understand sublimation as a physics term that would be talking about moving from going from a gas to a liquid and all this other kind of stuff. But in psychology, it is channeling the unwanted or unacceptable desires into a more productive or acceptable outlet. So finding the things that are within that are unacceptable and the things and trying to channel them into a way that is more productive, that is more acceptable, that is the spiritual journey that we've had you on. And that we're on. That's not we've had you on. We're just asking you to take up your crayons and follow us, like Cody Huffsettler said all those years ago in the Sunday school class. So it's just and eventually it leads to taking up your cross. But it's right now it's take up your crayons and let's go have some fun, and we'll see where this takes us. But this becomes difficult for the same reason that it was difficult for Jesus in his day, simply because he takes what would be considered the conventional wisdom and supplants what we think we know with something better. But in accepting this wisdom that is from above, one must be willing to relinquish what we know that we know. Let go of what we know that we know, or at least what we think we know. And this has at least been the case with me, as I've had to release the strongly held convictions and learn to play or learn playfulness all over again. And what this leads to, Proverbs 15:24, where it says in the King James, the way of life is above to the wise, that he may depart from hell beneath. In the NRSV, it translates, the wise path of life leads upward in order to avoid Sheol, or the place of the dead. It's the Hebrew mythology of the place where people go when they die. The wise path of life leads upward in order to avoid Sheol below. James chapter 3 talks about two different wisdoms. In James 3, I believe I put this one in here in the NRSV. It says, James 3:13, who is wise and understanding among you? Show by your good life that your works are done with gentleness, born of wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not be boastful and false to the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from above, but is these three things: earthly, unspiritual, and devilish. For where there is envy and selfish ambition, there will also be disorder and wickedness of every kind. Think about that, considering some of the things that we've said over the past few years. Disorder, chaos. It's where it's the kind of like the devil in the details, I guess. It's where the devilish thing resides. It's in this place of disorder, wickedness of every kind. Then he says this, verse 17, but the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. And the harvest of righteousness is sown in peace for those who make peace. In James 3:17 in the Mirror, Francois translates it this way. He says, the wisdom that originates from above sets the pace, as if we're on a journey, again, like we started with, sets the pace in innocence. Now, what's more innocent than a child? What's more innocent than Charlie Gray? What's more innocent than Magnolia? What's more innocent than the babies? What's that baby's name that you're holding? Bentley. What's more innocent than Bentley laying back there? As calm as he can be right now. But in a heartbeat, things could change. I could say something too loud and just disrupt his whole world, and he's like, what is going on? And he wants to scream because he wants to know, somebody comfort me from this loud, crazy man standing up there yelling at everybody. But that's the idea. Sets the pace in innocence. So instead of setting the pace, like he said before, now think about this. All right. Verse 14 and 15 and 16 in the mirror. Francois translates it this way. If there is any hidden agenda, secretly driven by bitter jealousy and contention, you have nothing to be proud of. Your big talk sounds superficial and offers no disguise. The fountain of your heart always shows. Throw that one out there for Teresa to use when she preaches. This wisdom does not originate from above, but is clearly reduced to a kind that is earthly, ruled by the senses, and dictated by demons. An environment of envy and rivalry is conducive to confusion and disorder and all kinds of worthless pursuits. So when we think about these babies, when we think about these children, these freshly born infants that we call human, and they're not defined human by their ability to walk or to talk or to do anything or to provide for themselves, but we consider them human for existing. But them, in their ability, and it's not in their ability to perform or teach us some unforeseen knowledge, even though we are learning from them in a way that they do not even understand yet. To teach us a form of wisdom that is first innocent. Teaching us a form of wisdom that is first and foremost pure, innocent, which again subverts the conventional wisdom. The conventional wisdom says, let's go to the boardroom and let's figure out a way that we can get over on this one or that one. We say we're a Christian business, but we're making merchandise of people. We say this, that, or the other, but we find a way to push people down and exalt ourselves. Now think about that. It's not founded in innocence. It's founded in making a buck. It's founded in trying to get over on somebody else. I'm not saying everybody's like that, but I'm just saying the conventional wisdom, if you've ever done business ever in America like I have, then the thing that you get into, it comes into competition, rivalry. Our business is better than yours. So when I go into a job trailer to talk to a construction guy and I say, you don't want to do business with them, their equipment sucks, their equipment is this, their guys are terrible, you're just going to break down. And knowing all the while we have the same type of people that work for us, our equipment comes from the same manufacturer, it's the exact same thing. You rent a JLG boom lift from us or anybody else, it's all going to be the same thing. They all break down, they all have problems, everything has everything. Everything breaks down no matter what brand it is. Everybody comes in on a certain Monday hungover or something or another, and something doesn't get checked out. The oil doesn't get changed. You name it. Something happens. And I'm sitting here talking about rivalry. It's not founded in innocence. It's founded in getting over on somebody. The conventional wisdom is competition, contention, envy, and rivalry. But James calls the wisdom that is from above these three things: epigeios, psychikos, and he calls those wisdoms. My bad. Sorry. I'm talking about the earthly, the psychikos, and the daimoniados. It's earthly, determined by the soul, as opposed to animated by the spirit, and demonic. He's talking about competition, contention, rivalry, envy, jealousy, all these things. He says it's a wisdom that's earthly, determined by the soul as opposed to being animated by the spirit, and demonic. Strong words, I'd say. So James says that the wisdom that's from above, the wisdom that originates from above, sets the pace in innocence. It loves peace. It is always appropriate, persuaded about that which is good, filled with compassion. Again, subverting the conventional wisdom and flipping what we think we know into something that we come to find out we never knew, or maybe that we knew and we've forgotten. One of my favorite quotes from N.T. Wright, he says, when God wants to sort out the world, as the Beatitudes in the Sermon on the Mount make clear, He doesn't send in the tanks, He sends in the meek. He sends the broken. He sends the justice hungry, the peacemakers, the pure-hearted. That wisdom is found in the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they'll be called not the guys that can negotiate a really good deal. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they can get anybody to agree on anything. Blessed are the peacemakers because they came in their suits and ties and they all looked so good that everybody just believed everything they said. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. So who's making peace? The innocent, the children. It's not our conventional wisdom. It's not the things that we know that we know. It's the innocent. It's the child. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit what? The earth. And we'll talk about the first person who actually did that. And it's Jesus. Just so you know. So when God wants to sort out the world, He doesn't send in the tanks. He doesn't send in the missiles. He doesn't send in the greatest and strongest armies. He sends in the meek. He sends in the broken. Blessed are the broken, the justice hungry, the peacemakers, the pure-hearted. This does not go along with the conventional wisdom. This is a wisdom that is beyond the vanishing point. It's beyond what we can see with our eyes. It's beyond what we understand with our degrees and our knowledge and our reading and everything that we think that we know. It's a wisdom that is beyond the vanishing point. A wisdom that we cannot see with our eyes, but we must feel it by faith. Walk the journey by faith. And this, for me, it leads to a way to learn to be human all over again. All of this childlike talk, all this stuff about philosophy, it's leading me to a way to be human all over again. Or at least what it probably should have been from the beginning. Before it was tainted and died by everything else that's in the world. Before I had the chance to be able to convince me to chase this, go after that, seek these things. Come to find out it was of the earth and earthy. And they taught us to chase it. Come to find out, you get there, you finally arrive, you make it, and you peel this nugget out of the ground, and after you've dug and dug and dug, and you look at it, it's shiny, it's beautiful. When you break it open, it's fool's gold. Here it is. It's supposed to be a piece of gold. It was fool's gold this whole time. It was fake. This is the new way to learn to be human. Or to learn of our own becoming human. The gospel writers and those who contributed to what we call the New Testament saw something unique in the person of Jesus that helped give definition and finality to what it truly means to be human. And again, it was confusing. Think of Nicodemus, who's going to Jesus after hearing all this childlike talk, I'm assuming, and this way of adulthood, coming to Jesus in the middle of the night, and Jesus telling him, you must be born again. And Nicodemus immediately reverts to what he thinks he knows. He reverts to his own knowledge of things. Well, let's revert to childbirth. What do I know about childbirth? You're telling me I have to go into a womb? What in the world are you talking about? This doesn't make sense. This doesn't match what I know that I know. So Jesus is telling him again, no, Nicodemus, you must be born again. And the word is anothen. It means above. The wisdom that is from above. The way of life to the wise leads upward. that he may depart from Sheol beneath. Way of life is above to the wise. You must be born from above. You must be born from a wisdom that you cannot attain. You can't get it going to school. You can't get it from living the life of hard knocks. You can't get it from any other way than by believing it and having the faith in it and understanding how to see with a third eye. The unseen way of seeing. It's not going to be one of your five senses that you're able to develop and harness over time. This is something entirely and wholly different. This is wisdom. It's the wisdom from above, like James 3 said. The wise path that leads upward, like Proverbs 15 says. So the three synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're unique from John. John is not considered synoptic because it's so different. With the three synoptic gospels, they seem to, as you read through them in the New Testament, they sort of make the disciples kind of seem dumb because they don't get it. They don't seem to ever get it through the story until later on, until you get to the end, specifically in the end of Luke's gospel. You get to the end of Luke's gospel and then suddenly, we got it. He's vanished. He's vanished. Now we know. And now what we do is we take what we've experienced and we search the Scriptures. They search what we call the Old Testament. They search through those Scriptures to attempt to define what they saw. So when Matthew begins to write Matthew's Gospel, he does it with all of the books of the law in front of him, all of the books of the prophets in front of him, and starts searching. I saw him do this with the donkey. That's in Zechariah. I saw him do this as being a suffering servant. That's in Isaiah. That's the prophet that said that. And he starts going through all this, and he starts walking through this liturgical gospel. And even you get this glimpse of it. You get this little glimpse of them beginning to get it in Peter. And in the book of Matthew, right in the middle, whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? Peter says, well, some say you're Elijah, some say you're this, that, or the other. Who do you say that I am? Peter says, well, I say you're the Son of the living God. And then Jesus tells him something that goes along with I would say exactly what I'm saying. Jesus tells him, flesh and blood did not reveal this. You didn't learn this from the conventional wisdom. You didn't learn this from the theological schools. You didn't learn this from the Pharisees. You didn't learn this from fishing. You learned this from my Father. You learned this from a source that is not of this world, not earth and earthy. All right? And then, so he goes through that. And then it takes Jesus leading them after that. All right, now keep that in mind. Peter's, oh man, the Holy Ghost bumps now. He told me I learned something from God. Woo, I don't even know what to do with myself now. He's all excited. I don't know what to do with it. He's running off through Galilee and wherever in the world else. He's arrived, man. He's made it. And then he thinks, I know something now. Let me stick my chest out a little bit. Let me stand up straight. So he show these young fellas what it's like to be Peter. He said he's going to build his church on me. I'm like, no, not really. It's on this rock I'm going to build my church. He called me Peter. Whew, that's cool. Anyways, then you get going a couple miles down the road. Jesus starts talking about his death. He starts talking about going to the cross. And what it inevitably is going to lead them to is for them to take up their cross. It's the first thing Peter says. Be it not so, Lord, absolutely not. I've been speaking to your Father too, and I learned a thing or two about you being the Son of God. We don't need the Son of God to take off and get killed now. And Jesus tells him, get behind me, Satan. Your conventional wisdom is earthly, not inspired by the Spirit, and demonic. That's what James was getting at. Earthly, not inspired by the Spirit, and demonic. So he calls him the devil. Get behind me, Satan. Get behind me, accuser, because it's preventing Jesus from being able to go the path of the mystic, which leads to unconditional love. It leads to surrender. So John, in his gospel, is quite different. Because John doesn't begin with them not knowing anything about Jesus. John does something that goes back to Genesis. And he tells you who Jesus is right off the bat. He doesn't talk about a virgin birth. He doesn't talk about any of that other stuff. He goes right into it. In the beginning was the logic, the Word, the Logos. And that Logos was God. And He was face to face with God. And when we saw His face, we saw the face of God. We saw the face of God's logic in this man called Jesus. Nobody, he says later on in chapter 1, no one had ever seen God, but Jesus has declared Him to us. Now think about that. And think about something that I said on Wednesday. In Genesis 1, 2, and 3, you have the creation stories. And you have these verb forms that are used. And he says, what does God say? Let there be light, and there was light. Let there be. Let it be. Let it be, and it was. Let it be, and it was so. Let it be, and it was done. Those are called indicative verbs. An indicative verb means that something is absolutely, surely, 100% going to happen. I doubt that any of you are going to spend the night here tonight, right? Are we good on that? You're all going to get in your car and go home, right? That's indicative. You will get in your car. You will go probably to the Mexican restaurant. That's probably where we're going. Go eat some Mexican. That's an indicative thing. We're going to eat Mexican food because it's delicious and it's amazing. We're going to go somewhere and we're going to eat. And then we're going to go home, and by the grace of God, we're going to take a nap. And whatever happens after that happens. It's the indicative. It's going to happen. What Genesis, but then you keep going. Let it be, and it was. Let it be, and it was. Let it be, and it happened. But then you get to this other portion where God seems to pause and think. This is the thing where God doesn't immediately just call it into being and it's perfect. This is the thing that God gives thought to. He says, let us make man in our image, likeness, and give him dominion. That verb form is subjunctive. It means that it's possible. It doesn't mean that it's done. There still is possibility. It's still not finished. So, when God speaks about humankind, He says, let us make man, which really seems like this is the first thing God has paused and contemplated. When He says, let us make this in the subjunctive verb form, which denotes something that is wished, imagined, or possible, unlike the indicative, which is a sure and factual thing. The subjunctive is left up to possibility. This gives a more complete way to describe what Paul referenced when he wrote to the Corinthian church, that the first Adam was of the earth and earthy, but the last Adam was a quickening spirit. The last Adam was life-giving. And what he is saying when you look at those verb forms that Paul is using to the Corinthian church, he calls Jesus not the last Adam as meaning the second. He's saying that Jesus was the first. Adam was the one that was second. That Jesus is the one that when He arrived, we finally saw man perfected. We finally saw the finality of what God was getting at this whole time. You mean that this guy was the plan? Yes. He was the plan all along, not Adam. We don't have to go back to Eden. We don't have to go back naked in the garden. We just go back to Jesus. That's it. Jesus showed us a new and living way, is what Hebrews said. A new and living way. Why? Because He was a life-giving, quickening Spirit. So everything that is within Jesus is about giving life. Not receiving, not pulling, not usurping, not anything like that about receiving. It's continual giving. This quickening Spirit that is giving life. So we are not born knowing fully anything as we ought to know it. We're born in a state of becoming. And it is so easy for us to attribute that becoming to Charlie Gray, to Bentley, to Magnolia. Well, one day they'll be able to walk. One day they'll be able to feed themselves. One day they'll be able to wipe their own rear end, for God's sake. Right? Josh says amen. He's tired of doing it. One day they'll be able to do it on their own. They will have become able. But at some point in our life, we tell ourselves we're no longer becoming. I guess the graduation is wiping your own butt. That I can do that now, so I've become everything that I could possibly become. Or is the becoming the job, the occupation, the house, the boat, the car, the things, the materialism? Or is the becoming a family? Is the becoming getting married to somebody that you love? Is the becoming having children? I think that's the precipice. I think that's the beginning. That's not it. That's not it. One of the professors at Aberdeen, he starts talking about our maleness and our femaleness is the thing that is the beginning point of understanding our humanness. Because when he references, or at least when Paul references about men and women, he says that every woman should have a husband and every man should have a wife, not for procreation. He says so that they could yield to the eros, the erotic desire. And what happens is when one yields to the other in love and in union, somebody is giving of themselves to the other. And what happens is their passion is entangled one with the other, and they are able to offer themselves in love, offer all of who they are to that individual. And that's unique, but it comes from Dionysius, who talked about Genesis 1 and the writings of Paul, and how love, it begins to show us inwardly that we already have everything within us to be that person who offers unconditional love. We already have everything within us. He said it doesn't take somebody going to theological school, and it definitely doesn't take somebody doing anything like that. What it takes is, it doesn't even take somebody being saved or in church. People get married all over the place. People are having relationships all over the world. That's with or without the church. He said what that relationship shows is that within each person there is already deeply embedded the ability to offer yourself to people, to offer your life, to offer yourself in an unconditional way without the thought of receiving anything in return. That's already deeply in there. So we're not born knowing fully anything as we ought to know it. We're born in the state of becoming. And again, we easily attribute this action to babies and children, but at some point in our supposed adulthood, we think we've arrived. No more becoming necessary, when in reality it's the most important time to become more human because we have all things before our eyes. And then we understand more fully what faith can be. This is the time of our lives where we are even more tempted with the riches of this life, the cares of this world, with the wisdom that is earthly, sensual, and demonic. As 1 John 2 puts it, do not love the world, 1 John 2:15, do not love the world or the things in the world. The love of the Father is not in those who love the world, for all that is in the world, the desire of the flesh, the desire of the eyes, the pride of life, or the pride in riches, comes not from the Father, but from the world. And the world and its desire are passing away. But those who do the will of God live forever. The lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, pride of life in the King James. He said, these are the things that pass away. They don't have the ability or the substance to remain. That's why in every generation there's a new form of greed. There's a different type of avarice. There's a different type of dangling things in front of you for you to chase like fool's gold. There's different things in the world, and with every generation there's a new thing, there's a new thing, there's a new thing. We went to Hadley's band competition yesterday, and there was a guy there that was at South Point High School that graduated, and he plays for the Buffalo Bills now. And he drove up in his Tesla truck. And I was like, dang, man, I've never seen one of those. It's a Cybertruck. The homeboy drove it down here from Buffalo, I guess. Still had a 30-day tag on it. And I was like, man, so we're walking around this Cybertruck. I've seen videos of them and all that. And I go and get in my truck, and I was like, what you can do is what I thought. I thought I can look at that Cybertruck, and I get in my truck, and it's like, it's not a Cybertruck. But you immediately start comparison. You start rivalry. The lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. We start looking at these things, and those are the things that pass away. Dad looked at the truck and he said, if I'm going to get in something like that, it better fly. If it's going to look that weird, I don't know if you've seen one. They look like something from the Jetsons. And so it looks like, he said, if I'm going to buy something that, whatever it is, $100,000, whatever it costs to get that truck, he said, it better fly if it looks like that. And then the lady was over there telling us that the windshield wiper is like $6,000 or something like that. Just for the windshield, it's one windshield wiper. So when you throw out numbers like that to regular people like us, we're like, I'm good. I don't. Lust of the flesh, nah. Pride of life, nah. Nah. I'm good. I'm fine. I'll take a paid off Toyota or something like that. I'll take something like that. With the gospel writers, let me get this. The gospel writers and the apostles point us to the final way of being human in the person of Jesus, who was the death of death by death. I'm making pretty good time. I think I'm going to finish this. I was concerned. I might even be able to mention something about what we might talk about Wednesday. The gospel writers, they point us to Jesus, who was the death of death by death. And it's a paradox that seems unrealistic, but it is nonetheless true. The only way it can be true is by faith. So Michael and Josh, over the past couple of weeks, they were talking about the sacrifice, being the sacrifice, living the sacrifice. And what Jesus would ultimately say is, take up your cross and follow me. And it seems like it's not the proper thing to do. The conventional wisdom says to save your life, save who you are. But here's Jesus saying, anybody that seeks to save their life, they're going to lose it anyway. And what he compares it to, or what it really could be compared to, is breath. Your breath, which again, we've talked about this. This is hard for me to talk about without losing. I'm good now. Okay, all right. It rose up and then I was able to push it down for a minute. That way you can hear what I have to say. We've talked about Yahweh. Yahweh being this term for God that they developed in captivity, in exile, because they were away from the land. They were away from the temple. The temple actually had been destroyed. So they had to come up with a new way to understand God. So what they did is they have this word that has no consonant, or has no vowels. It's just consonants. And what it is the sound of breath. Yah, va, Yah, va. So what they were saying is that if we cannot worship God in the temple that He gave us, if we cannot worship God in the land that He gave us, then we will worship God by our very breath, by the thing that keeps us alive. As long as we are living, we will worship God with every breath that is within us. We are saying God's name. So they come up with that name. And then the thing about breath is that it is meant to be spent. There is no breath that you can save. There is no breath that you can hold on to. As soon as you breathe it in, you must let it go. There's people that can hold their breath for 10, 15 minutes and they go down, deep, deep down into the ocean. But as soon as they come back up out of the top, I guarantee you, the first thing they do is gasp for air, because the breath that they had within them has spent itself. It has done everything that it could possibly do. As oxygen enters into the body, it begins to carry blood all through your body, and your blood full of oxygen picks up up all of these things and toxins and carbon monoxide and everything that is within your bloodstream, and it brings it back to your lungs, through your heart, everything, and it's expelled out. And while you breathe out poison, you're breathing in nutrient-rich life. And what you're doing is working in tandem with nature. You're working in tandem with creation as trees and flowers and plants themselves give off the nutrient-rich oxygen that we need to survive. And the thing that we expel, they are eating up. Now tell me how crazy that works. Tell me how crazy that is. The thing about breath is that, yes, it can be a voluntary thing. But when you're having conversation, you really don't think about it until somebody brings it up. You don't think about your breathing until some crazy guy gets up here and screams about it. And I think about when Michael was preaching about it, breathing in through the nostrils. And it's the way that God breathed into Adam the breath of life. And it said he became a living soul. He became animated by the breath of life that entered in through his nostrils and kick-started something. A project. A project began with Adam that was finished in Jesus and then leads to us doing the thing that Jesus did. And us being those people of clay, being the people of the dirt, being the people of Adam, we're no longer fashioned after the work and the labor and the whatever it is of Adam, but now we're fashioned after the quickening, life-giving Spirit of Jesus. So, for Jesus, it was the willingness to go along with the deceit. What was the real sacrifice of Jesus? That's what I'm getting at here. The real sacrifice of Jesus. It was for Him having the willingness to go along with the deceit, the lies, and false witness. The death itself, I would even say, for those of us that think through this critically, possibly paled in comparison to hearing the fabrications invented, the false claims dragged out in public, the embarrassment of being degraded publicly at the hands of envious, jealous men. Hanging on a cross, dying, looking down while you're suffering at those who had colluded with the government to put you to death. You're bleeding out on a cross, and they're at the foot of the cross, shaking each other's hands, saying, "We did it, boys. We did it. We won. We got him." And that plays out in many different places. It plays out in boardrooms. It plays out in sales conventions. It plays out in many different places. Shaking hands. We won, boys. We got him. We put them down. We're the ones that are going to be victorious here. Because that's the conventional wisdom. It's winning. It's rivalry. It's competition. But when Jesus goes in to set the world right, it doesn't look like that. Instead, imagine being Jesus and letting them think that they've won. Yielding to it. Yielding to their delusion. And being willing to lose. Nobody. I don't know if you watch the NCAA tournament. I watched it. I love it. It's one of my favorite times of year. None of the girls on the girls' side, none of the guys on the guys' side. None of them enter into the game ready to lose. Instead, they're hyped up on the side. They're in the waiting. They're in their area. They're getting even more hyped up. Then the music comes out. They're all running out there. They're ready to play. Everybody comes out with the intention of winning. Nobody enters into the game with the intention of losing. But here's Jesus showing us a new and living way. The new and living way is yielding to the deceit. Letting them lie about you. Letting them deceive others and cast your name into so many different dispersions and then placating it all with their own, all of their stuff that they think about themselves. We're great, and we caught this guy saying all this bad stuff about Moses and Abraham and everything else, and you guys just listen to us. We took care of him. We put him down. The sacrifice is willingly handing himself over to that sham. The feigning, the placating of those celebrating the win, letting them believe they won. And the Bible said he opened not his mouth, but like a lamb was led to the slaughter. Lambs have, when they go, they have no idea. They have no idea. As innocent, remember that. The wisdom is first innocent. It's pure. Innocently, like a foal. Like a foal, unknowing where it's going to go. Not aware of where this journey is going to take us. Not aware of where the wisdom is going to cause me to end up. But like a foal, opening not his mouth, but like a lamb led to the slaughter. Didn't say a word. And instead, in Matthew's gospel, instead of the Pharisees, his disciples, his mother, none of them. In Matthew's gospel, it's a Roman centurion and saying, surely this was the Son of God. In John's gospel, it's Pilate. Pilate says, after they've wounded him, after they've harmed him, and after they stand him up there with this crown of thorns on his head to mock him as their king or whatever it was, stand him up there and he says, behold the man. And it's meaning, behold the anthropos. Behold the man. This is what you've chosen to do to him. This is what you've chosen to do with this guy. Behold the man. And I think what John is saying, since John begins his gospel by saying in the beginning, and he plays off of Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3, I think what John is getting at is that the suffering, dying, hurting Jesus, behold the man. This was the project that God kicked off in the beginning with Adam, and this is the final outcome. The suffering, bleeding, dying Christ who was willing not to hang on to everything that he had built, not attempting to hold on to his breath, but expelled his breath, wasted it, gave his life, so to speak, gave himself, was willingly walked into that deceit, willingly mocked, willingly went that direction. But here's the thing about it. Jesus defeats death by death, not by just yielding to it as an inevitability. That is to say something, well, there's nothing I can do about it. That's not what he did in the garden. When he prayed in the garden, he didn't say, Father, I guess this is it. This is it for me. I'll see you on the other side, fellas. It's nothing else I can do about it. It's not at all what he said. That's not at all what he said. He came to terms by not fearing death. That's the point, is not fear death. He had no fear of death. And in so doing, he teaches us the same thing. Fear not those who can only harm the body, is what he told the disciples. Don't fear those that can only harm the body. Is you fear God that can cast the soul into Gehenna, into the place where there's waste, into the place where all the trash is burned. But even when my soul might be cast into Gehenna, if my soul were to be cast there, then the thing that gets burned up is anything that is not going to supply me with life. Anything, he said, the things that get burned up in fire, things that are built with hay, wood, and stubble, but the gold, the precious stones, anything like that, it survives and it becomes purer in that fire. He had no fear of death. Teaches us to have no fear of death. But this is him condemning sin in his flesh. What was the sin that he was condemning? Now we take that universally sometimes and we say, well, it was adultery, it was drinking, it was cussing, it was all the sins that we know. He condemned all the sin in the flesh. One thing that I think he was doing, I think it gets down to the minutia. What sin was he condemning in the flesh? By willingly entering in to their deceit, by willingly entering in to their jealousy and their envy and their ability to collude with the government to put to death the thing that they could not control. Here's Jesus in the flesh, yielding to it, yielding to that, and condemning it by letting it happen. He's condemning that sin in the flesh. He's condemning control. He's condemning their envy. He's condemning their wisdom that is earthly, uninspired by the Spirit, and demonic. He is condemning that sin in his own flesh. And in so doing, he becomes the first meek person to inherit the earth. As he said, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto myself. So instead of going in with tanks and guns and with a sword, he tells Peter, put away your sword. I'll heal the ear on the man that you've cut. Instead of going in with violence, instead of going in with anger and ferocity, instead I'll yield over to it. I'll be like a crying child. I'll be like something that is just led, and there's nothing that I can do about it. There's no control that I can put into it, and I have no fear over it. He yields to it and condemns their sin, their depravity. He condemns it in his flesh by saying, look upon the suffering servant. Look at how they made him suffer. And he condemns it by suffering. He condemns it by walking into it willingly. Yeah, but what about my reputation? What about my name? What about everything that everybody knows about me? This is the beautiful thing about kids. Kids don't care about their reputation. And here's this thing too. We start out as kids and we just can't wait to grow up. And when we finally grow up, we figure out it's not all that we thought it was going to be. It's not all it was cracked up to be. Letting go of everything that everyone tried to make us. Even in that dying to ourselves. Even as we get older and we begin to die to ourselves, like the Scripture says, at the end of the day, we're still able to say, look at how well I died to myself today. Look at how well I crucified the flesh today. It's not until death, physical death, is what I'm talking about. It's not until your physical death, when you're placed in the ground, that you cease from working entirely. And then God can begin to do something. God can begin to take the seed of your life sown into the ground, and the dust can begin to work all over again. And his inspiration and his life can begin to breathe into it all over again. And just like St. Ignatius said on his way to being martyred, he said, don't impede my martyrdom. And he said, because in doing so, you are preventing me from living. Don't prevent me from being killed by these animals in the arena. He said, because by doing so, you're preventing me from living. He believed that in his death, that he would actually come to new life, that he would be born. He said, by the time I get there, he said, I will be born anew. And then you think about, Irenaeus wrote about this young lady, Blandina, who in France, and during Rome controlled that part of the world, how she was put to death, this young girl, for one, a teenage girl, who automatically represented the weakness of the world, who has no choices, who has no anything like that, but still maintained her confession of faith. They said that they beat her and whipped her and tortured her so severely that even those torturing her, worn out, they got tired and quit. But she maintained her confession. And when Irenaeus was able to write about this, he said that she would be born of the same mother. And he talks about something that is quite interesting, the Gnostic idea of Sophia. And he talks about her, Sophia, being like the Mother Mary. He talks about her being able to present through a wisdom that we do not comprehend, a wisdom that we do not know, able to present this child who's been tortured and put to death, yet maintained her confession, and how she's able to present her as glorious, able to present us all as glorious. The thing about Sophia in one of the Gnostic texts is that Sophia, wisdom, is the first person to sort of get involved in that story and kind of mess things up. But then, in order to make it right, Jesus is born. And what she does is she instills herself in wisdom into Jesus. And Jesus is able to be the final Adam. Jesus is able to be the first and the last, truly, with the fullness of wisdom, knowing what it is that he has to do. In death, we can finally cease from all of our labor, be placed into the ground, and now God through the earth can begin to take dust again, breathe into it, and He can begin working with my life. In the end, I will have finally let go. I will have finally entered into a state of rest and be able to enter into a state like a newborn baby, and that I am entirely dependent on another. So what I'm saying is that this life is not just it. All the things that we think we've arrived to, we've not arrived yet. We've not arrived yet. This is a long and enduring life, and there's something that awaits us on the other side of death, and it is a rebirth. It is something brand new. That is why Jesus could be said in Colossians 1:18 and in Revelation 1:5, He was the firstborn of the dead. That's something crazy to think about. The firstborn child of the dead. But here's the way that we look at this now. I'm not telling you all to go die and bury yourself. Please don't take that, for God's sake, so that you can enter into the eternal rest, or whatever it is. Please don't think that. I'm not going there. Let me try to end it this way. In Hebrews 2:11, for the one who sanctifies and those who are sanctified all have one Father. For this reason, Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters, saying, I will proclaim your name to my brothers and sisters in the midst of the congregation. I will praise you. And again, I will put my trust in Him. And again, here am I and the children. Oh, I love that He says children. Here am I and the children whom God has given me. Since therefore the children share flesh and blood, He Himself likewise shared the same things, so that through death He might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by the fear of death. Again, Colossians 1:18, Revelation 1:5, He's the firstborn of the dead. And we utilize this language in symbolism in the form of baptism. Let me end with Romans chapter 6. Romans chapter 6. What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. How shall we? Ask this question. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? Seems complex. Maybe easy to understand. All right. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? Know ye not that so many of us were baptized into Jesus Christ, were baptized into His death? Don't you realize that when you went down in the water, you were buried in the ground? Don't you realize that when you went down into the water that you were a time traveler, and you went back to when Jesus was put into the grave, and that when you come out of the water, you were a time traveler, and you went into your future when you will suddenly arise after you hear the voice of an archangel and the trump of God? Did you not know that you were a time traveler, past and present and future? Know ye not that so many of us were baptized into Jesus, were baptized into His death. Therefore, we are buried with Him by baptism into death, that like as Christ was raised up from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in newness of life. For if we have been planted together in the likeness of His death, now catch that, planted together in the likeness of His death, we shall also be in the likeness of His resurrection, knowing this, that our old man is crucified with Him, that the body of sin might be destroyed, that henceforth we should not serve sin, for he that is dead is freed from sin. Somebody dead and buried, they cease from their labor. There's no fear of sin because they're dead, right? So what he's saying is that while you're alive, consider yourself dead. Consider yourself buried. Consider yourself planted into the earth, and give yourself this ability to relinquish it all. Be like this person who has finally been laid to rest. Somebody that has been put into the earth, and we believe that now their body has ceased from all of its labor, and now the earth and God can work together and be able to use the nutrients that are within that body as a seed, and something of new life begins to grow. He says, right now, live like that. Right now, relinquish all the fool's gold. Let go of everything that you think you know, that you know, that you know. Let go of all of it and let it be buried with Him in baptism as a symbol so that you can live in newness of life, like a newborn baby dependent on a God. A newborn baby like it's dependent on its mother and its father. You be that little baby. Be that child. Oh man. Okay. Let me say this one last thing. I said it was Romans 6. Let me say this one last thing. With Jesus going to the cross and going to the suffering in the way that He did, what He does for us in showing that is to relinquish not just all of the cares of life, not just the religious things that have been placed upon us, not just all the things that we talk about so often here, but to relinquish the fear of death. Like it says in Hebrews 2, all their life, those that were stuck under the slavery of the fear of death. Here's the thing. If you don't fear death, why do you fear an economy? If you don't fear death, why would you fear who's president in the U.S.? If you don't fear death, why would you fear what's happening in Iran and Israel? If you don't fear death, why would you fear anything in the world? Hurricanes, earthquakes, things opening up all over the place. Why would you fear anything if you don't fear death? If you're not afraid of death, then what in the world is there to fear? What in the world is there to be afraid of? Paul would say in Romans chapter 8 that none of these things can separate me. And what does he say? Neither life nor death can separate me from the love that is in Christ Jesus. So he showed us the path, the journey to unconditional love, to surrendering yourself entirely to the will of another, what that looks like. And then what we realize is that if I surrender myself to this world, if I surrender myself to the people that are within this world as a servant, the way that Jesus does, even if it kills me, if it takes my life, there's no fear in allowing it to take my life, because I know that if I'm placed into the ground, then I come out as a seed that's grown into something that's new life, and it goes beyond my vanishing point. It is beyond my ability to see with my natural eyes, and now suddenly I stop walking by my ability and I start walking by faith. Walking by faith. That's what it leads us to all over again. A journey that is predicated on faith. A journey that's not dictated by what I can see on a map. It's not dictated by what I can touch or feel or experience, but a journey that is by faith. Feeling what He is doing. And the only way that I know to guide my way through is that there are these three that remain. They said all these other things will vanish and perish and all pass away. The lust of the eyes, the pride of life, the lust of the eyes, the lust of flesh, and the pride of life. These three pass away. And then Paul would say there's three things that remain. Faith, walk by faith. Hope. I like to think that that something better is beyond what we're doing now. And love. Love. And the greatest of these is love. Why? Because God is love. And He shows us what it is to love our neighbor, our different neighbor, our gay neighbor, our Muslim neighbor, our everything neighbor, whatever the neighbor is. He teaches us to love, and to love wastefully. Love with your breath, because you can't save it. You cannot hold on to your breath. As soon as you breathe it in, you have to let it go. As soon as you've experienced the love of God, let it go like your breath. Love wastefully. That's the journey that He's taking us on. So if you'll say this with me, I love Him because He first loved me. God bless you. Thank y'all.